Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Manny Menchel. I serve as Chief Impact Officer at the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, and it's an honor to welcome you for our second session of the Israel at 75 virtual book series, co-sponsored by Jewish Federation and Moment Magazine as part of the Federation's ongoing Israel at 75 initiative. Federation is proud to partner with incredible institutions like Moment as we mark this milestone year of Israel's independence and offer our community members many thought-provoking ways to engage with Israel, especially during these complex times. Today, it's a thrill to introduce what will undoubtedly be a rich and provocative encounter with acclaimed author and filmmaker Etgar Keret, whose artistic creativity introduces curiosity, disrupts assumptions, and demands attention and imagination. Today, we'll dive into Keret's Suddenly a Knock on the Door. Na'im Mo'od, Etgar. We'll be led by Amy Schwartz, Moment Magazine's opinion and book editor, as well as editor of the magazine's popular Ask the Rabbis section. Before coming to Moment, Amy was a longtime editorial writer and op-ed columnist at the Washington Post, covering education, science, and culture, and where she was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in commentary. Please join me in welcoming Amy.
Glad to see you. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Etgar Keret to this event. He is an internationally acclaimed Israeli writer and filmmaker, known for his short stories, which, as Manny alluded, rarely extend beyond 3 or 4 pages. He fuses the bizarre with the banal. This is things that have been said about him, and offers a window on a surreal world that is both dark and comic. His books have been published in 45 languages and are bestsellers in Israel. They include, besides the one under discussion, The Bus Driver Who Wanted to Be God, Missing Kissinger, The Nimrod Flip Out, The Girl on the Fridge, and Fly Already, as well as Suddenly a Knock on the Door, which we're going to discuss today. The Fly Already won the Sapir Prize. He's also won many other awards, the Charles Bronfman Prize, the Book Publishers Association Platinum Prize, the Chevalier Medallion of France's Order of Arts and Letters, and the this is my favorite thing in your bio, and I want to go back to it. Keret's stories have inspired Polish architect Jakub Zizeni to build the narrowest house in the world in Warsaw, 38 inches wide. So if you think we're going to get away without discussing that, forget it. He's also an award-winning filmmaker. With all that said, Etgar Keret, I'm pleased and honored to have the opportunity to talk to you today. And to be honest, also a little bit terrified because these wonderful short stories that you write, they are terrifying. I mean, there are many other adjectives we could use, but I found they just knocked, many of them are a punch in the gut. They're very short. Let's start with a matter of form before we delve deep into content. Everyone points this out first. Your stories are extremely short, a couple of pages at most. The one you wrote for Moment a couple of years ago, you were kind enough to let Moment print one of your short stories, and it was kind of like this. It was less than, I think it might have been 200 or 300 words. But there's always a lot going on outside the frame. So let's start with writing short. I can't avoid mentioning the old saw, which it's been attributed to various people, Mark Twain, Benjamin Franklin, where the person says, "I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." So I wonder if you could talk about why you write so short.
It's certainly not a conscious choice. It's not as if when I sit down and say, "Oh, I feel like writing a 4-page story." No, I once said in an interview that I feel my stories are like explosions, and I've yet to learn how to explode slowly, because I think that there is something about the way that I write my stories that I'm not totally in control of the text. It's a little bit a kind of a collaboration between my consciousness and my unconsciousness, and everything about it is kind of feels like an eruption. It feels like some kind of a stream, or something that is liquid in nature. It's not like kind of structuring, putting one brick over the other. And I think that when you write things that are so emotional and intensive, then you can't write them for long. It's a little bit like the difference between marathon running and 100 yards dash. 100-yard dash is kind of pretty easy. You run as fast as you can until you drop. So this is the way that I write my stories, and I guess that's why they're short.
So one of the things that's interesting about the stories, of course, they only, I could also say they only seem short in some ways. Once, as each sentence of the very short story, you learn more about what's happened to the person right before the story or years before the story. But I wonder, so when the story comes to you, you see the whole world of the place where people are living. Often they've just been in some kind of violent accident. Does that reflect anything about how you feel you're living in real life?
No. I think it mostly reflects on the way that you read texts, but we can have another session about that. I again, when I write stories, I think that that there is a huge scope of the stories I write. Some of them are third person narratives, some of them are first person, some of them are hyper realistic, some of them are fable like, some of them are sci-fi like. So I think that I wouldn't agree with any topics that you would pick. I've published more than 200 stories, so basically we could play a game. And you name, let's say, a fruit, you say guava, I say, I have a story called guava, So in this sense, I don't think that I write necessarily about accidents or I write about other things, but I do try to kind of capture some kind of an emotion or a situation through an action or a thought or a sentence. And in that sense, when I write a story, it's not like kind of that I have an arc of a story. Mostly I have like a voice of a character, some kind of a psyche of a protagonist, some feel of the meter of the sentences in this word. And everything, and the story kind of erupts from that. I'm a professor of literature, and I always tell my students that for me, a good story by definition has to be smarter than the person who had written it, because if the story is just as smart as them, they're not writing a story; they're assembling an IKEA furniture. They're basically doing something that they know, And for me, writing is really first and foremost an adventure to which I go out as a writer, knowing that if I'm lucky, in the end, I'll learn something about myself, about the situation, about the way that I've experienced that situation through the work of the story, through kind of engulfing or kind of unpacking the story. And I feel that in that sense that, I also write nonfiction. And I feel that for me, the biggest difference between writing nonfiction and fiction is that when I write nonfiction or personal essays, I usually retell something that had happened to me, some adventure of some sort that I took part in. And it's a little bit like I would say to you, hey, Emmy, I was once in Thailand and it was very late and I couldn't find a taxi. Now, when I tell you this story, I know what's going to happen. And one thing for sure, I'm going to survive the story because I'm right here telling you that. But when I write a fiction story, I feel that me and the reader, almost at every point in the story, we know that everything is possible. We know that everything can happen. And that makes the story, I think, much more intense, because every choice that will be taken could be totally destructive, not only for the reader, or not only for the character in the plot, but also for me. I'm anxious when I write the story because I don't know what will happen to the character and what I'm going to discover about myself. I feel, I say many times when I talk about the relationship between me as a writer and a story, then that I say that I feel many writers, let's say, the story for them is like a car. You enter your Tesla, you put your GPS or Waze or whatever, and it kind of navigates you to where you want to go. But the way that I write a story is more like kind of a cowboy riding a horse, which means, that I want to head south, I want to get to the mountains before it's night. But if at some stage the horse will refuse to take one road and insist on taking another, or if it will stop because it needs to rest or it needs to drink water, then I kind of have to respect that. It's not the story is not a tool. It's a collaborator with you kind of in a driver's seat, but with the story itself having a lot of leverage to send you to places that you would never expect that the story could get to.
Mm-hmm. So it's coming from somewhere. It's coming from somewhere other than just what you planned. It's you're writing the story.
Yeah,
He's writing you.
Yeah, and that you say it's coming from somewhere other than what you planned. But for me, the whole trick is not to plan because the thing is that the moment we plan, let's say if I say to you, Amy, I know that I'm in Israel, but I'm a very fast runner. And when we finish this Zoom, how about I run to your place and we will go and have a coffee in Dunkin' Donuts? Then if you say yes, we'll have coffee in Dunkin' Donuts. But if we both walk and look around, maybe we can find a better place, So I feel that this is something in the essence of the process of me as a writer. I think that, many times when you talk about, especially novelists, the most common metaphor is an agricultural metaphor. When you write a novel, you wake up every day and you work the fields, and sometimes you say maybe no corn will grow, but you keep on doing it. Now, I feel that when you write short fiction, you're more like a hunter-gatherer. Mm. So when a hunter-gatherer enters the savannah, he doesn't say to his partner, tonight I'm going to come with 2 rabbits and an apple. He's going to come with what he's going to find. And the idea is that if you kind of, at least for myself, if I limit myself, if I tell myself exactly what I'm seeking, I can write that. But there's something so much less exciting about it and much less revealing about it. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that let's say I can write a story, and it's a story about the rise to fame of a film critic. And if at some stage in the story, this guy will get mugged and somebody will hold a gun to his head, when I write the story, I will know that the guy can die. And in some of those stories, he's going to die, even though it's a story about his rise to success. Maybe he becomes a successful dead man. Maybe he's less successful than I thought. But I'm saying, if it's a dialogue, if it's democratic, then the story gets to choose too.
So I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking that it's no accident that the title of this collection, it's an earlier collection that we're looking at, is called Suddenly, A Knock on the Door. What's the word in Hebrew?
Pitom.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds like a very important word for it, that this is, as you say, the surprise in the title story. Every time the narrator is asked to tell a story, suddenly he's interrupted, or if he's not interrupted, then nothing's happening, and you end by he says, like, look, if there's no knock on the door, there's no story. So
so I think, I didn't think about it before, but I think that knock on the door is a very good example for or a good metaphor for a story, because usually when you get this suddenly knock on the door, you've been doing something else, and this thing takes you completely by surprise. And when you go to the door, you don't know if you won the lottery, or if it's a pizza guy who got the wrong apartment, or if it's a hired killer coming to kill you.
All of which happens. No spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the action of opening the door, or very much like the action of writing a story, is this act of anticipation that you say, oh wow, I'm kind of excited and scared, and oh, I can't wait to find out what's on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you, I can't resist doing this. So you said guava. Suppose we just say guava. You have a story about guava. So I'm going to say, rabbit. um,
Okay,
this
I
isn't
have a
this
story
isn't
about a
from
rabbit.
this is from the other book, Fly Already, and I was just this is these but these two this is the story about these two kids who their fathers leave. These are two different families that turn up in the story. Their fathers leave, and independently they both decide that the pet rabbit is in fact their father, and they have to take care of. They're okay. They don't care. They don't mind that their father supposedly left because they know he's there with this rabbit. And then in this volume, you have a story. In the earlier volume, you have a story about a man who something weird happened. He's a widower. His wife died. We're not quite sure why, but he gets on a train and he meets this woman with a poodle. And the poodle is his wife. He's positive that the poodle is his wife. Um, so I mean, not to be too flat-footed about it, but what's going is are you thinking a lot about masks? I mean, what's going on with these animals that are people, or maybe?
Yeah, again, it's not thinking about masks, because it's not like a man wearing a poodle mask or a poodle wearing a woman's mask. It's basically a dead woman being reincarnated as a poodle, meeting her a widow husband who actually killed her. But what I really think is that there is something about the movement of the story that many times the intention of the characters, or their emotions, they're stronger than, let's say, the rules of physics.
Right. Edgar,
And
can I just parenthetically, can I ask you, someone in the audience said, can you either stabilize your phone or put it down so it doesn't jump around? Is there a way you can prop it?
yeah, I can do it. Is this a
See if
good
that,
solution?
see
Yeah,
if that
good.
helps. Yes, that way you don't jump around so much. Okay, sorry, go back to
Yeah.
what you were saying. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So what I want to say about the way that the story kind of reveals itself, that it's very much like a dream. So let's say if you dreamt a dream and you meet your father, and your father said, my father once told me something, and then you say to him, you're lying. Your father didn't say that. Then in a dream, it would be very likely that your grandfather will enter the room and speak to you. While in real life, he wouldn't, because he's probably long gone, So I think that when you're in a universe where you control all the parameters, you're kind of you're godlike, then you can be loyal to the things that you find most important. You can be loyal to the time-space continuum, or you could be loyal to some kind of an emotion that is the heart of the story. And I'm saying that this is something that we don't have in life, because in real life, if I see the love of my life and she's on the fourth floor, I can't levitate, but in a story I can. So many times this kind of allows you to be truthful, or to be loyal to your subjective feeling and not to the objective one. So let's say if I write a story and I meet the love of my life and we kiss, and when we kiss, I feel we levitate in the air, then you could read it as a fantastic text. But when I've met the love of my life and I've kissed her, I did feel I was levitating in the air. I just didn't share this feeling because I knew that it was physically wrong. But when I write a story, I don't have to be loyal to some kind of a physical ontology. I can be loyal to whatever emotion comes to mind.
So when people say these stories are surreal, you're saying no, there's a reality there that just is in a different. It's just in a different form than you'd experience it in real life. The guy really does leave his wife in the pool.
So I'm saying, when we talk about reality or realistic fiction, it's a good thing to ask ourselves what we're talking about, because I don't know who is joining our webinar, but imagine that some people in a webinar believe that there is a God, and some don't. And some believe that there are aliens on another planet, and some don't. And some of them believe that there is reincarnation, and some don't. Now, when we talk about realism, we're not talking about what we feel is true. We talk about all the stuff that all of us agree that is true. In the kibbutz of the webinar, we say, you know what? If you want to talk about God, I won't talk about reincarnation and ghosts and aliens, okay? We're here in the middle ground. And I think that this is a very good pragmatic tool for a society to function. Because, you know, if you say to me, hey, Edgar, bring me coffee, and I say, God will bring you coffee, and you say, no, you bring me coffee, because we're in a society, and we're just talking about what we agree on, and we agree that you can bring me coffee and that you exist, so please bring me coffee. But if I write a story, then there's no need for me whatsoever, you know, to kind of keep my club card, you know. I don't have to keep all this. So if I think that there is a God, then there will be a God in my story. And if in a certain story I think there will be an alien, there will be an alien. And if in a third story I need to fly to save my child, then I'll fly to save my child, because this is the subjective experience that I have is the driving force of the story.
So I can't resist the segue to Israeli politics from what you just said. Here is a country where a lot of people have different views of these some fundamental aspects of reality. Does your take on this and your lifetime of writing in this way, does this give you any insight into what's going on now?
I think it gives me, I think basically also living 55 years in Israel, I have this kind of experience that I can say that this is unprecedented, this is dangerous, scary, and extreme. You know, again, I'm saying we can talk about it theoretically, but let's say if I would ask you a riddle, okay? Think about a liberal democracy in which the minister of defense there, who is in charge of the police, was charged more than 50 times of a criminal acts, indicted of 8 criminal acts, among them an act of terrorism. And this guy had in his living room a picture of Baruch Goldstein, who committed the most terrible hate crime, killing Muslims and the Palestinians in the history of Israel. And if I would say to you, this guy, he's responsible of the police that used to arrest him, that up until a year ago, the Secret Service and the police would follow him because he would cause problem. Then you would say, and I would ask you, where would you put this country? Then I wouldn't say, that must be Jerusalem. It has to be Israel. They have to be Jews. If they took a terrorist, you know, who's a racist, you know, who's continuing the way of Kahana to be in charge of the police, it must be Israel. This, just saying this sentence, you know, it sounds like an oxymoron, you know, the same way that the Minister of Communication, who's head of TV, the moment that he came to power, he said, like, you know, I actually like reading scriptures and seeing very right-wing TV, then I want to close national broadcasting. It's this kind of a dialogue that I think that comes from people who fundamentally, if you look at this government, the two strong power in it are ultra-Orthodox and settlers. Both those groups, they accept democracy, but it's secondary to another thing. You know, for an ultra-Orthodox, they believe in democracy, but following the way of God is more important. When you talk to settlers, following country rules is super important, but the holiness of the country is more important. So when those people are in power and they want to throw democracy outside of the window, and they tell me it's going to be okay, I say to them, listen, I won't teach you how to pray. Please don't teach me how to be free or democratic or liberal. And I'm saying, this situation it's so extreme in so many ways that I can talk my head off. But basically, the fact that somebody like me goes almost on a daily basis to demonstrate, we're having a shock grenade throwing at him, being pushed by policemen, a professor in university, a writer, a little guy who has asthma, who's actually very, very afraid of any physical confrontation. I think that, and I have my prime minister calling me an anarchist who should be held down with a fist, and his son calls me a terrorist. And, between anarchists and terrorists, and the head of the legal committee says that I should be in jail. So there is such a big a rift here that it's really, really impossible. It seems almost impossible to close. But I want to press a point. This rift is not between secular and religious. It's not between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi. It's between people who respect the democratic system and people who don't. Now, the people who don't, they're actually a very, very homogenic group. Ultra-Orthodox settlers and Bibi supporters. The people who oppose them, we actually have all the four tribes that Rivlin talked about. Because, if you go to those hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating, you will see religious people demonstrating for democracy next to gay people. You see women, demonstrating next to people with yarmulkes. You see soldiers demonstrating next to people who are demonstrating against the occupation. It seems as if, it's not a camp. We don't share the idea. We just share fear. And the idea is that we want to keep the rules of the game. It's like I'm saying most of the people in these demonstrations are people that I wrote against and voted against. Really like people like Gideon Saar or Zev Elkin that that did many actions that I found still unfair. I fought them, but the way that I fought them, it was like when you play a football game. They were the opposing team. Now, the people in charge, they want to change the referee, to make the game as long as they want, to start with a head start. They want to do all those things that are not about me and them fighting for the democratic game. Now, I want to say one thing. The way that Israel survived for 75 years was because in the democratic game, there was only always one holy value, and that's keeping the status quo. Whenever there was, people say, let's have public transportation in Jerusalem in Shabbat, and people say, hey, let's keep the status quo. And it's a good idea when people are so different, saying, if you want to make a change, make a little one. Don't make it extreme. Make a process. And suddenly we have a government that, in 2 weeks, basically, throws in 60 laws, that it doesn't matter if it's Daniel Kahneman or Biden or Dershowitz or Eugene Campbell. Everybody says, or the people who are in charge of how much interest we will pay for that. All of them saying it's a bad idea. It's going to ruin everything. More than half of the country is out in the street, and yet our government, thinks that everything is okay. This is really it's a bug. I don't have problem. I've been opposing Benjamin Netanyahu with respect, for, I would say, 30 years.
Have you been in street protests before, or is this the first time that it reached that level for you?
No. Look, I think in the past I was in protests. The protests that I was usually in were not ones that were so big and popular. It could be, I don't know, for gay rights. It could be for Palestinian rights. But it was always something very, very small. But here, everybody feels threatened. So everybody's there. You go to the demonstrations. You see 90 and 90 plus old people who can't walk, who come with their Filipino helper, and they say to the helper, the sign, come on, Sam, give me the sign. And they hold the sign, and it's heartbreaking. I think about my late parents, the idea that all of this will be thrown For what? For a system that will be unequal toward women and unequal toward non-Jews. I don't want to live in an ultra-Orthodox country. This kind of a tension between being a democratic and liberal and believing in freedom and being Jewish is something that we wrestle with all the time. It's not a solution to solve it by throwing democracy out of the window. We're talking here about rules that wouldn't pass even in countries that are not 100% democratic. For example, a death penalty, to terrorists, but to non-Jewish terrorists. Or that there is a rule now that they want to pass against missionary work, that would mean that if you're religious and we had a conversation and I convinced you to stop being religious, I will go to 6 months in jail. Does this sound normal in any country? I mean, not to say about the fact that if you go with half a sleeve somewhere in the vicinity of the Western Wall, you'll also be sent to 6 months to jail. So I'm saying, it's not so surprising that people go with those Maytail outfits.
Yeah.
All those changes will leave many groups unprotected. Now, I'm saying, I'm a white, privileged professor, coming from Ashkenazi country. I'm actually one of those few guys that will get hurt last.
Right.
I think they're going to get to me, but they're going to get hurt last. But when you think about single mothers, when you think about the children with special needs, when you talk about homosexuals, when you have in the government people who still believe in treatments that would cure homosexuals from their homosexuality in the 21st century, then you think that something here is fundamentally wrong.
Okay, yeah. No, let's take a step back from all this. There's so much.
I scared you.
We could talk about
make Aliyah this week. We need you now.
Yeah,
it's now more than ever.
This is all connected to, in a lot of ways, things I wanted to ask you anyway about your background. In many ways, you have a very unusual background in some ways. You told me your family has all these different strains in it. In other ways, you kind of encapsulate things about the state. Your mother you're a child of Holocaust survivors, for instance. You've written a memoir. Can you bring talk about that a little bit? Talk about how that affects your work, having all these, being, for instance, the child of survivors to start with. You've talked about your mother very amazingly about This American Life. You've told Ira Glass a lot of crazy stories. I'm not crazy.
Yeah. So I try to keep this very short. So what I want to say is that basically I grew up not in a very standard family, because both my parents were Holocaust survivor, children of war, basically losing most or all of their family in the war. So when we grew up, I would say that it was less of family and more like a partisan group hiding in the forests of Ramat Gan. The whole idea was that we stuck together, we loved each other, we knew that the world outside there could be crazy, but that we can trust each other and trust each other's help. And basically, we became a family with many, many big differences. Just to say, my father was a revisionist. He was in the Irgun. He really admired Begin. By the way, I also admired Begin. And when Netanyahu came to power, he stopped voting for the Likud. But he was a right-wing person. My mother was more right-wing than my father, and she was among the people who started a movement called Hatria, which was more to the right than the Likud. My brother is in the extreme radical left wing, and he started the legalized marijuana movement in Israel. And my sister is an ultra-Orthodox. She has 11 children and more than 50 grandchildren. And she used to live in the settlement. I visited her many times in the settlement for economical reasons, because she couldn't afford an apartment in a cheaper place. But now she lives in Mea Shearim. And the idea is that in a family, my father always said, people can have different opinions. The only question is, not what they want to do. Where are they aiming for? Where do they want to go? And he said, when I look at this family, and it doesn't matter if your sister is praying or if I'm more to the right or you more to the left, you're good people. I think that people like you around me, they're a much better choice than people who agree with me but cheat on their wife, don't pay their taxes, and beat up their children. So it's okay. We all want the life to be good, but we have different plans to reach that point of goodness and fairness. So I grew up in a place where not agreeing with people was very, very easy. But I believe that now, through social media, we live in this kind of bot mentality, that when people
Boat mentality.
Bot, those bots that are like computer things that they answer.
Bot mentality, yes, like a robot, yeah.
So the thing with bot mentality is that you and I don't know it, but some of our engagement, we talk to bots on daily basis. When somebody says to me, I'm sorry that you're not dead. I don't know if he's a bot or not a bot, but the idea is that when you talk a lot with bots, you become a bit of a bot yourself. If you would talk to somebody aggressive, you become aggressive. And there is something about all this thought, or way of thinking, that it really brings people with zero curiosity to arguments. When I was young, I was afraid of arguments. And you know what? I was afraid that they'll change my mind. Because I've been in arguments that changed my mind. Today, this is non-existent. It's people pretending to be speaking, but most of the time it's basically they want to throw the stuff like a bot. You can't convince a bot, in your opinion. He's just there to sabotage the path that you're taking. And, I posted a photo with me holding a sign in a demonstration. It just said, I used to write books, now I write signs. That's what it said. Huh. And there was a link to an essay I wrote. So according to Facebook, the people who entered the post, it was 600,000 people. Can you guess how many people pressed the link to read what I wanted to share with them?
5. Fewer?
32 out of 600,000.
Yeah, no, that's so do you think, I mean, it's we're seeing this all around us. Do you think this affects what you can do with your fiction? Does this change your work at all? This world we're living in?
Well, my parents told me, as children of war, they told me in time of a mental and economical prosperity, when things are great, they said, always go to the center, Tel Aviv, New York, London. When things are bad, always go to the outskirts, small villages, because when it's a mess, like when it's great, go to the source of greatness. When it's crap, run as far as you can, So with me, I must say that if in the past, when I did my project, I always looked for the central stage. I want to be Netflix. I want to be a bestseller. I very, very quickly realized in the last years that where I want to be in that small village where I don't have to take into consideration all kinds of forces that I don't necessarily appreciate. So I started a newsletter. I have a newsletter in Substack called Alphabet Soup. And I rather write in my newsletter than write in newspaper as I did before, because I feel that there I have ultimate freedom, and that the dialogues that I have with the people is that the people who want to hear me, they come to hear me. It's not that somebody bought a newspaper and got stuck with me.
Oh, that's interesting. Speaking of which, we had talked a little bit about whether you'd like to read on this program a very, very short story. And you picked something. Do you have it handy by any chance?
Yeah, I have it, but I feel very challenged even doing it from the phone and not from my computer. So I think it could maybe complicate that thing. So if it's an option, I rather.
Okay, I'll tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you what. We will link to it because I just want to make sure that people feel that they're getting a direct look into your work as well as you as a person. So I'll tell you. So this is a very short story called Asthma Attack. which you sent us, and it is what, 3 paragraphs tops? It's a very, very short story, and we will.
Maybe I think it would be shorter if you read it.
I don't. Well, I don't actually have. Yeah, I mean, I don't actually have it
Okay,
here, but I mean,
okay.
I could, I would.
So people can read it through link.
We can link to it. People who are listening.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you. So you wrote you've you know we're trying through this series to talk about Israel through a trip through many genres. You know, we're talking to you about short stories, but I know you've also written this memoir, and you've also worked in films, which I guess can't be 30 seconds long. Some of the films are short, but you've also won awards for longer films. Can you talk about how those are different, how you get different insights, or how you can express different things about, I guess, about Israel, just so that we stay on the topic, although I know that it's not just about Israel. Maybe talk about your memoir.
Yeah, so actually I'll talk a little about my mother, and through that I think I can. So the last project that I did, that was also there was a show about it in This American Life, a half-baked stories about my mother. It's all about an exhibition that I did in the Jewish Museum in Berlin, basically trying to tell the story of my mother the way that she used to tell stories. And the way that she used to tell stories as a child of war was a way that a child tells story, which means the dates are not important. Where it took place is not important. The rank of the soldier is not important. What's important is basically the emotions and energy that play along. So she could tell a story. One day I woke up in some hotel, and this guy with big boots came in and started shouting, "Where is your father?" You know, and that would be the story. Now, I think kind of being kind of brought up in this way, this is the way that I write my stories. I follow what my mom told me was important. I follow the emotion, I follow the action, and I'm less interested in some kind of an infrastructure around it. And I think that with my mother, it was some kind also of a way of rebelling against her identity as a Holocaust survivor. Because I think that, I bet it's the same all over the world, but in Israel, when you're a Holocaust survivor, you're like this little pebble in a mosaic, you know, together, and you're supposed to kind of represent this idea of the Holocaust through your existence. And my mother always rebelled against it. I think that for my mother, basically she was a movie star in a periodical film that happened to take place in the darkest time of history. But her stories were not about the Holocaust. Her stories were about her, about learning why it's important not to lie, or learning how you should be loyal to other people. Now, the fact that the stories were horrible and many people died in them were not the focus of the story. It was not a story that was there to depress me or to deter me or to scare me. It was a story about those little moments in life, and they happened to take place in very extreme times. So the way I write about Israel is exactly that. I don't want, like, I'm not a stone in the mosaic of Israel. It's not if you put all my stories together, the flag will come out. But I want actually to pick all those places that for me are the essence of Israeliness, but you'll never find them on a postcard. You know, a guy with a yarmulke asking in a McDonald's if the hamburger is kosher. This is Israel of the 21st century, not a camel in the JCC. You know, this is what it's all about. You know, the tensions that you have, the things that you have to deal with. So I think that kind of the way that my mom wanted to show me how the Holocaust was like, or how the World War II was like through those molecules of experience, I think in this kind of sense, I want to tell people about what's Israel like, you know, but not to tell them by kind of, let's say, a top down, but bottom up, you know, take a few of those little fruits and taste them, and the mixture in your mouth will taste a little bit like Israel.
That's very interesting, because that's the theory on which we did this book series. We thought, you know, how can we let people see things about Israel through literature, through its best through its writers, that they can't see any other way. So, I mean, that's an example. I mean, what you say about the man in the McDonald's in a yarmulke, that's a great example. Does anything of the stories? I mean, I could try to guess which ones you mean, but are there stories in this volume, in Suddenly a Knock on the Door, that work that way for you, about sort of this is what Israel really is like from the bottom up?
Yeah, it's not my latest collection, so I have to kind of run through the story. But Suddenly a Knock on the Door, for example, is a very, very Israeli story, and it's basically a story about me opening the door and finding myself in my study with three violent weapon-wielding people who demand that I write them a story or they'll kill me, you know. So when I say to them, hey, that's not a way to write a story, they explain to me, this is how it happens in the Middle East. You know, the only language people understand here is force. So we're not asking you to do it, we're forcing you to do it. And I think that there is something about this, that it's not only about kind of this tension in Israeli characteristic between seeking a story, wanting to find this sensitive cultural thing, but at the same time doing it in gunpoint. Mm-hmm. You know, it's once Diego Luna, a very talented Mexican film actor, did a one-man show of my work, and my work is especially successful in Mexico. And when I said to him, I don't understand why of all places I'm so successful in Mexico, so he said to me, I've never been to Israel, but reading your stories, I have a feeling that Israelis are very much like Mexican people. And I asked him, in what way? He said, you know, Mexican people, we live in the most violent, impossible reality, but we're all very happy people. And if we will meet you, we will ask you, come on, help me be happy, or I'll kill you. You know? and in that sense, I think that this kind of a marriage of tragedy and hopefulness, you know, extreme violence and some kind of inner search for a place of peace and solace, you know, I think all those elements are very, very dominant in almost any story I've ever written.
Interesting. So in that vein, I have to ask you about the story about the guy who goes from door to door asking people if they had a magic goldfish that would give them 3 wishes. What would the wishes be? He thinks, oh, this is great journalism, you know, everyone will want to relate to that. And everything's going fine until he meets a guy who actually has a magic goldfish that gives wishes, at which point things go bad. Is that, could you talk about that as a I mean, what does that tell? I don't want to be too reductive. What does that tell us about Israelis?
No. So I think there is something about the story that I wrote it just when Israel commercial TV kind of emerged. Mm-hmm. And the idea in Israel commercial TV was some kind of all kinds of recipes to sum up what it means to be Israeli. You know, to reduce it to something, you know, you put tefillin, you eat hummus, you go to reserve duty, you're Israeli, you know. And it was a very kind of they would do almost kind of like commercials to Israelism that would be very reductive in a sense. That I thought, where is Jewishness in all this? Like, come on, like, you know, I don't have to be Jewish to eat hummus, you know. Right. But maybe to study in Chevruta or to be reflexive, I do need to be Jewish. So why do you take all those things that I miss the point? And in the story, I wanted to have somebody who is an immigrant. This guy is a Russian immigrant, and no wonder he's a fisherman, so he has a talking fish, because, you know, there is the Pushkin fairy tale about the goldfish that grants you wishes. But in this sense of a guy from TV wanting to sum up Israelism, and a guy who found a goldfish with wishes wanting to maximize his gain, you know, in the end, when all is gone, what's left is humanity. and I wish not to be alone. I wish, to be a part of something and not right, but secluded, on the upper ethical side, but with nobody else around us.
I got a high ethical mountain, but all by yourself. So,
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of questions from the audience. I think we covered a lot of them in the flow. A few came up organically, and you sort of covered them without even being asked. But there is one question, a very practical question, and that is: do you have tips for short story writers or people who aspire to do what you're doing? What do you?
Oh, I have many. So I think first of all, it's very important for me when I write. I've been writing, for 36 years. To really enjoy the act of writing, because I think many times when you go to schools, they basically say you have to reach this end, you have to kind of climb this Everest, you have to write the great American novel or the great Israeli novel. And I think that this is not a good incentive for somebody who wants to live a life of a writer. Because, like people told me to work out. I paid the gym. I went twice. I could go 5 times. I hate it, so I'll do 20 times, but I'm going to stop, So for me to keep on going, I have to do something that I really enjoy. So I think that when people sit down to write, I think they should write the story that interests them the most, not the New Yorker story or not the story that will win some prize, but what will interest them the most. And in the end, in some weird way, this will probably be the New Yorker story that will win some prize.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. And is that how it went with your movies? Also, I read something. You made a movie with your wife called Jellyfish, and you talked about how it was the first time either of you ever directed a movie, and you just did it because no one else would, and then it won the Prix d'Or or something at Cannes, right? Is that just
Camera d'Or? Yeah.
Camera d'Or? Yeah. So
yeah, it's a cool prize. Jim Jarmusch won it for his first movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So is that just a example of just a labor of love? You just do something; it's the right thing because it's what you want to do.
I think that the same way that I write stories that are short and basically try to capture a moment usually or an incident, I live my life this way. So most of the projects that I did lately were not projects that I planned to do, but I stumbled into. For example, during the Corona, I've met a Israeli choreographer in Val Pinto. Now I don't know anything about dancing, but she's super talented, and it was interesting to talk to her. And we both had some kind of a similar COVID experience. And I had a story I published in the New York Times, and there was this Japanese foundation that would give us $2,000 if we do something connected to Japan. So all in all, we made a short video dance called the Outside that, that was shown in Times Square and was shown all over the world. But the only reason was that we wanted to do something together, and it had to be with Japan. And it was COVID. So we are dancers, but we couldn't have the two dancers dance in the same room. So one of them danced in a room and the other danced inside the TV, so all those kind of things, they're basically a little bit like writing a diary of your life, allowing your life what it can be. And in the end, most of those entries can be confusing or boring and you will never publish them. But when there will be a special moment in your life, you write about it, not the ways that you write a report. You write about it as if you're in that moment and you're experiencing it completely, with no barriers. And so I'm saying that I think that when you do that, it's kind of higher the risks, because when you write this way, most of the time it will be really bad. But when it's good, then there is something about it that I think it's good in a unique way. I'm not saying in any way better, but it has its kind of form and the sincerity and integrity that it's usually difficult to create when you're using text or using language.
We have another audience question, again, very practical. Do you teach writing classes in the United States?
No, I sometimes universities invite me to give those 2 or 3 days workshop, and I love doing it. But the only place I teach in regularly, I'm a professor in Ben Gurion University, and there I give constantly writing workshop. But if anybody out there want to invite me to give a writing workshop, I actually like doing that.
That's great. And on that note, thank you, Etgar Keret. I'm going to pass you back to Manny now. It's been really an honor. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone else has too.
Thank you, Amy.
Take care. Be well.
I just really want to thank you both, Amy, Etgar. What a fascinating conversation. Thank you all of our listeners for joining us today. Etgar, it's just an added treat to peer into your literary process as hunter-gatherer. Learn a little bit about what animates your creative process, what's clearly predicated on an organic encounter with your environment. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Of course,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, our great pleasure, Etgar. And our Israel 75 programs are well underway. This is the second session of 5-part virtual book series. And please join us Wednesday, May 17th, where we will welcome Ilana Kershan, where she'll be introducing and sharing about her acclaimed book, If All the Seas Were Ink. Look out for the link. I think it was just posted in the chat. And I encourage you to explore all the different ways that Federation, local organizations, synagogues, JCCs, restaurants are marking Israel 75. And today was one of the many high points of this example and this moment. So thank you again and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.